But let's start with you, David. You had an interesting article that you found today that might make you think that AI is sort of already here. It's not a new thing. It's an already thing. So tell us what you found.
Yeah, so I found this study that is a collaboration from GitHub and Wakefield Research that was surveying a bunch of different developers, and it said that 92% of US-based developers are already using AI-powered coding tools at their place of work, which just seemed not terribly surprising to me, but just the fact that at least in the popular news cycle, the fact that artificial intelligence, or at least the AI tools such as ChatGPT, have only really been big in day-to-day news for probably the past 6 months or so. But the fact that at least among developers and coders, that it is already near 100% adoption rate for using it as a tool for work is super interesting. So there's that aspect of it. But I think I found to be the most interesting part of this article was that when most people, I think, would see a headline like this and go, well, I wouldn't want to be in software development now because eventually AI is just going to take the jobs of all of the software developers. But what I found really interesting was how this article framed it and how the developers actually do see it. A couple of quotes from the article. We also found that AI-powered coding tools enable individual developer productivity and greater team collaboration. And they continued on, collaboration emerged as a vital aspect of the developer experience. Over 80% of developers believe that AI-powered coding tools can enhance team collaboration, improve code quality, speed project completion, and improve incident resolution. And what I think that ultimately boils down to is that, at least in its current form, AI is not in any danger of taking a software developer's job. What it's allowing software developers to do is to reduce the amount of time that they have to do very tedious coding tasks that an AI is going to be very good at just picking up based on context and being able to take care of for them. And they're able to focus on higher level things. The article also talked a lot about how developers have a big focus on being able to upskill themselves and how AI is allowing them to spend more time learning more advanced skills because they're not having to spend as much time on these more rudimentary coding tasks that they were often having to spend time on. So I thought that this was just a really good example of how AI can help to make humans in a job that can be considered so technical or robotic in some senses become even more human and allow them to improve their ability to collaborate with other team members and to improve and better their own skills.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, David, the point that you made there with AI allows them to, it takes care of the rudimentary tasks, the rote tasks, and it allows them to kind of move into higher levels of creativity. That's a common argument that you hear a lot. There's an interesting thing I was playing with as you were talking, and I was sort of thinking this through. And so maybe I'll think about it out loud here, and you can kind of walk me through it.
Okay.
I'm live in an old farmhouse and have been doing a lot of work on it, which is sort of an ongoing sort of sidelight of mine. In fact, today was an interesting day about doing some. Before we came out here, David and I were laughing about some of the things I was trying to get done today in conjunction with everything else. And so because of that, I spent a lot of time in hardware stores and specifically in Lowe's. And so, you know, at some level, more and more as I get older, I'm noticing things that we think. Have you ever had that nostalgia? Maybe you haven't, David, but I think there's a nostalgia twinge where you like look at something and you go, oh, wasn't it nice back in the days when? And, you know, if you've ever watched like an Andy Griffith show and you're like, you know, back when the hardware store, when the guy was behind the counter and all those things were there. And I was like, yeah, I wonder if at some point I'm ever going to sit back and go, wasn't it amazing when I stood at Lowe's and like literally everything in the building supply world was right in front of me? Like one trip, didn't have to order it, didn't have to wait for it to be shipped, didn't have to go to another town. It's all sitting there. And not only that, but almost any problem that I have, there's a solution and a way to do it better. You know, having a trouble, I was putting in conduit and trying to fish lines recently. So Lowe's has everything you need, right? All in one place. But there's this level that people talk about that there's more and more specialization. Like people don't do. So I was listening to an interesting podcast the other day about hunting of all things. And the guy was saying that, we live in a society where you do a subset of a subset of a subset of a subset, and you're really specialized at doing that thing, which is interesting. It creates this opportunity for us to do these things like have a Lowe's where the supply chain, which is almost infinitely complicated, works in a way that I can walk into Lowe's and buy a thing to fish a line and the cord to pull and the conduit and all that kind of stuff all at the same time. And at this other end of the spectrum, you've got this thing that as that happens, you're less and less connected to the outcome. And so people become more and more dissatisfied. And so I think there's an interesting thing here going on with AI that in one end, it is enabling us to do that, which allows us to do this really amazing things. But, and here's the twist in the story, David, but you have to exert creative power to get fulfillment out of that. And here's what I mean by that. You could now be so specialized that you could pay somebody else to go to Lowe's, get all the stuff and come in and do that because you work in a subset of a subset of a subset of a subset. And consequently, you will have this kind of modern dissatisfaction of not feeling like anything you do really matters. On the other hand, you can go to Lowe's and stand there and go, look at all the creative options I have because everything is right here. I could buy it today. I have a thing, I think it's called like a life pump or something like that. That is, you stick it over somebody's face and you push it down and it sucks out there's whatever's in that's the obstruction in their airway, right? So it's this really crazy life-saving tool that is like 1,000 times more effective than a Heimlich maneuver. And I have little children in my house. And so I bought that thing and I stuck one in my dining room above the table. I stuck one in both of my vans and first aid kits and things like that. The guy that designed that went to Lowe's and Home Depot and went to the plumbing section and bought all the parts off the shelf there and then put the first prototype together. Now, see, here's the thing. You can be a subset of a subset, a subset of a subset and say, oh, like Lowe's is so dehumanizing. Or you can look at that and say, my human creativity now has this feast of hardware in front of me that I can build all this different kind of stuff with. Seems to me like there's a little bit of that going on with AI, right? So yes, there's going to be a lot of coders who are now out of business because they're not going to code everything from start to finish to some extent, right? They're going to do a subset of a subset. On the other hand, there's going to be some other people look at that and go, well, if something can do 90% of the work, I can take this and be so much more creative. But that is not a natural, and I guess this is my point now that I've thought this out loud. That's not a natural jump. That is a jump that requires an act of will and effort. Like in other words, if AI is going to make you more human, you're going to have to interject will and effort to do that. And then it can make you much more human because it can enable so much more creative stuff. But if you sit back and just allow it to kind of push into your space, it will dehumanize you because you've let it to some extent, right? Like you have to consciously use it and remember that you're using the AI, not the other way around. Does that make sense as I've kind of meandered my way through that? So.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely it does. Because really, I think that we've harped on this point pretty much every episode of the podcast so far, and we're probably going to continue doing it, is that AI is just an incredibly powerful tool. And what that tool allows us to do is that it can allow us to potentially get sucked into mediocrity, essentially, where we are just letting the AI do all of our work and all of our thinking for us. But if we know how to properly harness it, how to properly understand the fact that it is a tool, it is something for us to use to heighten our own ability to do more things, to be more capable in and of ourselves, not to rely on the AI's capability to do things for us, then it can allow us to ultimately advance as personal individuals and also just in society with technology in general.
So, David, there is a level here, too, that this is true across the board. So you're talking about these developers, was it 92%? Was that the headline? 92% of US developers using AI-powered tools at work. So it could be that 92% of the people that listen to this are already using AI because it's really AI that's powering Google Maps, right? I mean, do you know more about this? We didn't talk about this beforehand, so I'm springing this on David. But that's the case, right? I mean, like when Google reroutes you to a new route because of traffic, that's some level of AI working there, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think up until this point, it would have been considered machine learning more than artificial intelligence, but really those terms have kind of gotten conflated to some extent. So yeah, it is to some extent, yes.
That's actually the point that I was trying to make, though. So machine learning, so I don't know that there's like written down anywhere, but David, is kind of the bright dividing line between machine learning and AI. Is it language?
That has been at least the differentiator for what most people mean when they contrast the two terms. Because, for example, the autocorrect on your phone is using the same type of logic that ChatGPT is using to some extent, is really what's happening. It's just the autocorrect on your phone is not necessarily talking to you, whereas ChatGPT is able to sound and seem a lot more human-like, and so it seems more intelligent than the machine learning that's on your phone that suggests words for you.
I was trying to run a parallel here in my mind, again, sort of thinking out loud, which is that to some extent, like, if you have pets, you've got some machine learning going on in your life, right? you know what I mean? Like, maybe more specifically, if you're using a dog like a service animal, right? So like you've got a dog there that is. I was wondering if there's some parallels to think about here, like because a dog has an active intelligence and yet doesn't have language. So therefore, the dog does some things that you can't do, can certainly communicate with you in a specific way, right? Can be taught to do some pretty high level stuff, and yet still without that lack of language. And my now just going to break down a little bit here, but lack of language, it's clear that it's not human. I'm wondering if AI. Now it's okay. The analogy breaks down because a dog is still living, right? And we're not suggesting that AI is living. But yet there's a little bit of that going on, right? Where AI can be taught to do some things, is really good at some things, but yet still does not, I said language, but in this case still does not have this kind of inherent ability to independently think and sort of communicate. And so there's a real gap between the two. This is not my news story, but I watched and our team shared an article by a Wall Street Journal reporter who tried to train on purpose, tried to train an AI to build an avatar of her and then have that avatar sit in on her meetings and answer her phone calls. And in some cases, like for instance, the avatar was able to create a voice that fooled her bank's voice recognition system. So they got into the bank, but it was pretty obvious that even though it was saying the right things on a meeting to some extent, it was a lifeless plastic version of the real thing. And people instantly, in a second, realized that this was something fishy going on.
Yeah.
And so there's an interesting piece there, kind of like you talk to a parrot, right? The parrot sounds like a person, may say some things that make sense, but is lacking that kind of cognitive spark that puts those things together. So thanks for listening to this clip. If you want to check out the rest of this episode, as well as our other full episodes, you can do so on the channel.